So good Vach, everybody, and welcome. A new week, a new Torah portion. Actually, this week is a double header. Parsha VaYelech. Even with the two together, we get very few verses. I think there's only 72 between the two Torah portions. So, but much to learn. But we focus always on an idea. And this week we're going to focus on actually the idea of Torah itself. And when we mean Torah itself, not even the study of Torah, but a Sefer Torah, the Torah scroll, as in Parsha VaYelech, the command is given. Let us go to that command. Okay, you have on your screen there. And Parsha VaYelech, the second portion, I think it's the second last commandment in the Torah. And now, write for yourselves this song and teach it to the children of Israel. Place it in their mouths in order that this song will be for me as a witness for the children of Israel. So, first of all, it's interesting that the Torah is a song. The fact that it's a song means that it should have some rhythm to it. It should have a melody to it. It should have some soulfulness to it because it's a song. So you should remember that when we're always studying. Sometimes people learn and teach with a sing-song. Actually, the Alter Rebbe himself, founder of Chabad, the author of the Tanya, he indeed, when he gave over Torah, was with a sing-song. And many people studying, they do it in such a manner. But teach it, we have to learn it, we have to teach it to make sure it's carried on forward. But what I want to focus on over here is that there's a mitzvah over here. What is that mitzvah? That everybody has to write this song, to have this song, meaning that we have an obligation to write our very own Torah scroll. Look what Maimonides, the Rambam, says. It is a positive commandment for every Jewish man to write a Torah scroll for himself, as the verse states, and now write down this song for yourselves. Right? It says very clearly the verse. Write down the entire Torah, which contains this song. Even if a person's ancestors left him a Torah scroll, it is a mitzvah to write one himself. If a person writes the scroll by hand, it is considered as if it was received, as if he received it on Mount Sinai. If he does not know how to write himself, he should have others write it for him. Anyone who checks even a single letter of the Torah scroll is considered as if he wrote the entire scroll. So maybe we should all become scribes, right? Which obviously is the obvious question over here. What does this mean over here? That we should have our own Torah scroll. We should write our own Torah scroll. Maybe we should have a class on Safras, on the laws and the ways to the Jewish calligraphy, so we could write our own Torah scroll. But the question is, we see how many people write their own Torah scroll, how many people even own their own Torah scroll. So the truth is that for practical reasons, that this mitzvah has not become a widespread one, although a mitzvah nonetheless. And the Rebbe explains something that we're not going to go into today, why this mitzvah has been neglected, and gives many different angles and approaches towards this. However, one idea is that the main purpose of a Torah scroll is to learn from, and to learn from in a public setting, meaning with a minyan that you read from it. Since the community owns a Torah, and if we partake in the communal Sefer Torah by giving towards it, then in that sense we have a part of a Torah scroll. One explanation that's given. Another is given that if you have an aliyah to the Torah and you actually read from the Torah quietly alongside the Baal Korah, the Torah reader, then it's considered that you have full ownership of the scroll during your aliyah. Thereafter, you, of course, return that ownership to the hands of the community through your aliyah. So those are some of the explanations that it goes into how we can fulfill that mitzvah. It's well known that Rebbe made a campaign first for children, that every child should have a letter in the Torah. And then he came to adults, that every adult should have a letter, an ois in the Sefer Torah, a letter in the Torah. And in that respect, you kind of own a piece of the Torah. You own a piece of the Torah. And that's something that we should all do. As a matter of fact, we have a campaign going on over here. Unity Torah Montreal, I think it is .com, if I recall correctly. I have to double check. But I think some of you have already signed up for it. And but it's an important thing that every Jewish child that's born, every one of my kids born, grandchild born, immediately we get them their letter in the Torah, because we all have, first of all, our letter, and secondly, through this we have also a fulfillment of this particular mitzvah. Okay, now, like every mitzvah, there are the parameters in how you fulfill the mitzvah. When you put on tefillin and they're not between your eyes, or they're on your forehead, or they're not for parchments, you don't fulfill the mitzvah properly. So likewise, I say for Torah, there are the do's and the don'ts. There is the parchment the way it needs to be made. There's a specific way how parchment is to be made. There is specifically how ink is supposed to be made. There are the way you make the shape of the letters. And the fact that the letters have to go in sequence. Imagine a simple little thing that if you wrote the letter Vav, which is just, a basic line, and it's supposed to be written up, down. If you wrote it down, up, not valid. It's not valid. That's why, by the way, when you buy a Torah, tefillin, mezuzah, you get it from someone who you can trust. Because, how did they write it? You don't know. You have to trust them. And they did it properly. To see the letters that they're not touching each other, that you could see that the letters are written properly, that a base is a base and an aleph is an aleph, or a base doesn't look like a chaf, right? And a chaf look like a base. So those things you could see. Every shape of the letter is a vital force and therefore has to be written appropriately. Even the space between letters has a meaning to it. The fact that how far apart the letters are, there is halachic ruling. And even the mindset or the intention that the scribe has when writing God's name specifically. You need to have specifically then intent. Now, those are the letters, how they need to be properly written. But then there's even the general layout, the aesthetics, shall we say, of the Sefer Torah. How it needs to be spaced. How many numbers of lines appear in a column. That's also halachic ruling. Let's take a look what Maimonides says about this. Maimonides over here says, there are other practices which, though they are not mentioned in the Talmud, have been followed by scribes as tradition transferred from generation to generation. One such tradition stipulates that the number of lines in each column not be less than 48, nor exceed 60. So you have, a Torah scroll parchment, and you have all lines going down. So the Rambam says minimum 48, maximum 60. Now the Tur, Rabbi Yaakov ben Usher, he disagrees. And he says that Rabbi Yehuda Barcelona wrote that the number of lines per column should be at least 42. So what do we have over here? Rambam says minimum lines is 48. Rabbi Yehuda Barcelona, cited in the Tur, says 42. Maximum lines, they both agree that it is 60. So the question, of course, is what's their argument about? It has to be some reason why they're arguing. It's not just purely, the aesthetic look, because really you can't say it's just that, because the size of the parchment or a Torah scroll, sometimes you see a Torah scroll that's small, sometimes you see a Torah scroll that's huge and medium size. So the amount of lines per column, the fact that they would be uniform, or not necessarily uniform, but minimum 42 to 60, according to the Tur, Rabbi Yehuda of Barcelona, and according to Rambam, 48 to 60 must be rooted in something. So we have over here, in Talmud Tractate Seifrim, says each sheet of parchment must have no less than 3 columns and no more than 8. So now this is the width-wise of each piece of parchment. Remember, parchments of a Sefer Torah are sewn together. Can't have one parchment that's going to be writing a whole Torah. So they're sewn together. So each piece can be no less than 3 columns, but no more than 8. As for the number of lines in each column, various opinions attributed as follows: 42 lines corresponding to 42 journeys in the desert, and 60 lines corresponding to 600,000 Jewish people. Interesting. So what do we have over here? We have here explanation of why 42. Why they're 42? Because the Jewish people journeyed 42 journeys in the desert. For the 40 years that the Jewish people were in the desert, 42. Right? How many Jews traveled that were from the ages of 20 to 60? Was 600,000. So therefore, 60 is to remember that, because, again, the Torah, where was it a gift? It was a gift given to us in the desert. Being that it was given to us in the desert, so we commemorate that which we experienced in the desert, 42 journeys, and who journeyed? 600,000 Jews. Okay? So according to Rambam's position, right, that there should be 48, then seems quite puzzling. What is the basis for the 48? After all, we see that the concept of 42 is what the Jews did travel. We see in Parshas Maseh at the end of the book of Bamidbar of Numbers, that 42 journeys of the Jewish people. So, to understand this, we need to go to the next step. The next step is to understand the following story. This is a story that occurred in the book of Numbers, but it's recounted in this week in the book of Deuteronomy, and that is the story of Aaron, the high priest, who is Moses' brother, and his passing. He passed away on the first of Rosh Chodesh Av, in the year 2487. A few years ago, right? That's over 3,300 years ago. He passed away. He was privileged to have a wondrous, miraculous, divine climax to his end of life. He had no illness, no pain. He had what we call the kiss of God. The bliss of life, well lived, that his soul peacefully returned to its maker. As we learn in the verse, let's take a look at the verse over here. If anybody wants to come and join it with their video, that would be amazing to see you. Appreciate it. So it says, the verse says, and they traveled from Kadesh, and the entire congregation of the children of Israel arrived at Mount Hor, Har Hahor, Mount Hor. God said to Moses and to Aaron, to Moshe and to Aaron, at Mount Hor, on the border of the land of Edom, saying, Aaron shall be gathered to his people, for he shall not come to the land that I have given to the children of Israel, because he defied me, my word, at the waters of dispute, the name Meribah. Take Aaron and Eleazar, his son, and ascend to Mount Hor. Strip Aaron of his garments and dress Eleazar, his son, with them. Then Aaron shall be gathered to his people and die there. Moshe did as God commanded. They ascended Mount Hor in the presence of the entire congregation. Moshe then stripped Aaron of the garments and dressed Eleazar, his son, in them. And Aaron died there on top of the mountain. Then Moshe and Eleazar descended from the mountain. The whole congregation saw that Aaron had expired. The entire house of Israel wept for Aaron for 30 days. Moshe was awestruck by what he saw in how peaceful his brother passed away, and he wished for himself that he should have the kiss of the kiss of God upon his passing, which indeed did eventually happen. Now Rashi explains that his garments that he dressed, that were stripped and taken off in the presence of his son and put on him. So Rashi explains over here, his garments, Moshe dressed him in the garments of the high priest and then stripped him of them. To give them to his son in his presence. He instructed him, enter the cave. And he entered. He saw a ready-made bed and a lit candle. He instructed him, get up onto the bed. He got up. And he got up. This is Aaron, right? Got onto the bed. Stretch out your hands, and he stretched them out. Close your mouth, and he closed it. Shut your eyes, and he shut them. That moment, Moshe yearned for such a death. This is why it is said to him later, in the way that Aaron, your brother, died, a death that you desired. So, the Torah tells us that the Jewish people wept for Aaron for 30 days. And actually, it's interesting. It says, Kol Beis Israel, the entire house of Israel, wept for him. And actually, it's wept for him even more than they wept for Moshe Rabbeinu when he passed away. Why did they weep for him more? It's because of the Ahavas Yisrael, the love that he had for fellow Jews, that he brought peace between husband and wife, between friends. He was the peacemaker. And because he was the ultimate peacemaker, therefore, his passing was more deeply felt than even Moshe's passing. Now, so Jewish people, he passed away on, as the Torah tells us, the Mount Hor. He was eulogized and mourned for 30 days. Adding to the trouble of the Jewish people with his passing was that there was an ensuing war that took place with King Arad. King Arad was a Canaanite king who lived in the south, and he heard that the Jewish people had come by route of the spies, and he waged war against the Jews, and he took from them a captive, just one. Israel made a vow to God and said, if you deliver this people into my hand, I will consecrate their cities. God heard the Jewish people's voice and delivered the Canaanites, and he destroyed them and consecrated their cities, and he called them Hormah. Okay. All right. So, sorry. So the verse over here, let's take a look at that verse, excuse me. It speaks about what ensued with the passing of Aaron was this battle with the king of Arad, the Canaanite. And where did it take place? As it says over here, in the place of Hormah, of Hormah. So the question is, we just learned that Aaron, passed away at Mount Hor. And then upon his passing, there was a battle with the Canaanite king of Arad. And it says here that the place was Hormah, or Hormah in Hebrew. So it seems to be a contradiction. What happened? Where was it? Where did he pass away? So if we look further, they journeyed from in Bamidbar. They journeyed from Kadesh and they camped at Mount Hor at the edge of the land of Edom. Aaron the Kohen ascended Mount Hor at God's bidding and died there on the first day of the 5th month in the 40th year of the children of Israel's exodus from Egypt. Aaron was 123 years old when he died at Mount Hor. So what do we have over here? It's saying over here, clearly the second instance in the Torah that his passing, in two instances in the Torah, we have that the passing was in Mount Hor. And now if we go further into the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, it says, and children of Israel journeyed from the wells of Bnei Yaakon to Moserah. There Aaron died, and there he was buried. And Elazar, his son, served as a kohen in his stead. So what's the problem over here? Well, we have three problems over here. Moshe is telling the Jewish people that Aaron passed away at Moserah. Right? This is the book of Deuteronomy. In the book of Deuteronomy, it's Moshe speaking in first person. So he's the one who is telling the story, right? First person. And he's saying that his brother Aaron died in Moserah, that they traveled from Bnei Yaakon to Moserah, and there he died. That is a complete contradiction to what we read in this reading over here in the book of Numbers, that Aaron Cohen ascended Mount Hor at God's bidding and he died there, right? Furthermore, we have over here in this in this reading over here, it says that they traveled from Bnei Yaakon to Moserah, right? That's here in the book of Devarim. But if you look in the book of in Bamidbar, they travel the opposite way. 1 second. My apologies. No, okay. I have that reading here. So we have a contradiction in the path that they traveled. Did they go from Moseira to Bnei Yakan, or from Bnei Yakan to Moseira? And furthermore, we need to understand, why is Moshe Rabbeinu in the book of Deuteronomy speaking about this matter when the whole point of this book is that he's addressing the generations that are going to go into the land of Israel? He is encouraging them, giving instructions, and rebuking them. What is the point over here? To understand that Aaron's passing, and we're missing the reading here. Hold on. Okay. We're missing a reading. With Aaron's passing, and that it has to do actually with the golden calf. Excuse me a moment. Mm-hmm. Okay, sorry. My apologies. What we have is a contradiction in the travel route of the Jewish people. And that's the point over here. So Rashi actually explains. Let's look at this reading from Rashi, and he'll explain. We need to understand, why are there two different places that are mentioned in the passing of Aaron. In the narrative itself, it says Mount Hor. When Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, in the book of Deuteronomy, is recounting the story, he says in Moseira. So Rashi explains. And the children of Israel journeyed from the wells of Bnei Yaakov to Moseira. What is the relevance of this here? Furthermore, did they really journey from the wells of Bnei Yaakov to Moseira? Was it not from Moseira that they had come to the wells of Bnei Yaakov the opposite way, as it says, and they journeyed from Moseira and encamped in Bnei Yaakov? That's in the book of Numbers. But in Deuteronomy, it says the opposite way, that they went from Bnei Yaakov to Moseira. Moreover, why does it say there Aaron died? Did he not die in Mount Hor? The answer is that this is also part of Moshe's admonishment, reminding them of this error as well. He told them, when Aaron died on Mount Hor at the end of the 40 years, and consequently the clouds of the divine glory departed, you were afraid of the impending war with the king Arad. So you appointed a leader to return to Egypt and went back 8 stops until Bnei Yaakov, and from there to Moseira. And at Moseira, you made a great mourning for the death of Aaron, which was the cause of your retreat, and it seemed to you as though he had died there. Okay, so let's understand what's going on over here. Rashi just explained to us. There's a contradiction. There's a contradiction between the book of Numbers and the book of Deuteronomy, right? And that's what we just resolved. Yes, Aaron passed away in the Mount Hor, which is what is in the book of Numbers. However, they didn't mourn him and eulogize him till later when they came to Mosera. Why? Why only there? Is because they were fearful. What brought fear upon them? Two troubling things. One, Aaron passed away. That was troubling. Secondly, they had a battle with the king of Arad, even though they defeated handily the king, but it was too much for them. Aaron passes away, the one who brings peace to the Jewish people, and they're battling, even though they're great victory, but it was a setback for them. And they had a great lack of trust in God. They said, you know what? Let's retreat. We're going to go back. So they went back. They went back now from there. And they went backwards. They traveled from Bnei Yaakon to Mosera. And from Mosera, they realized, oh boy. And what I mean back, meaning back towards Egypt. And then they realized, you know what? We made a grave mistake. So with that, we understand Moshe rebukes the Jewish people about their retreat. It was a grave error, lacking in trust of God. There, they eulogized and they mourned him. And as if his passing had, so to speak, only occurred then. Did it literally occur then? No, literally occurred at Mount Hor. However, the people did not properly mourn his passing because of his passing and the battle. So they started to retreat towards Egypt, and only afterwards they were mourning him. Is that clear? So therefore they retreated. Now with this, we can understand the relevance of this retreat to the columns of the Torah scroll. So we said previously there were 42 stops that in the end of the book of Numbers, Parsha VaYelech, that is the basis of Rabbi Yehuda of Barcelona, that says that a Torah scroll has to have a minimum of 42 lines, right? Because of the 42 journeys. Now, what do we have according to Rambam? Rambam says 48. So if you take 42 plus the 7 that they retreated, that gives us 49. 49 stops means how many journeys? 48, right? Because from point 1 to point 2 is 2 stops, but 1 journey. So the 49 is 48, and that's the opinion of the Rambam. The Rambam says that the journeys in total are 48, and therefore the minimum lines that a Torah scroll needs to have is 48. And that's the distinction between the two. Is that clear? In other words, according to the Rambam, you include the retreat. According to Rabbi Yehuda of Barcelona, you don't include the retreat. Right? So it sounds very academic, which on one level it is very academic. In other words, we see now that something that seems to be just maybe just inconsequential or just, happenstance that it's 42 or 48. No, it's based on something that's very important. Torah is about our journey in life. And therefore, even how many lines there are on a column is reflecting that journey that Torah is meant to help us upon. 42 or 48. But let's take this a step further. That's very nice. But we know that Torah is a guide to life. So there must be a guidance over here that this is meant to teach us. In other words, it's not just that according to one opinion, 42, another 48, right? And they have a basis where this is coming from. That's very good and fine, but that's good for the scribe who needs to know how to write a Torah properly. We're not scribes. So what relevance does this have for me today? It has to have relevance because it's part of the Torah. And Torah is totally relevant. So a concept that we've learned previously from the Baal Shem Tov, actually when it came to Parshas Maseh, the journeys of the Jewish people, is really 42 journeys of everybody in their life. Your soul comes down into this world, and Torah maps out what that journey is meant to be, how you're supposed to navigate that journey, what the destiny is, what your purpose and fulfillment in life is meant to be. It's 42 journeys, as it was by the Jewish people back then. It is likewise now. That's what we learned from the Baal Shem Tov. 48, though, where does that, how do we understand that? So we know that life is full of trials and tribulations. There's always times that you can feel stuck, times that you can feel that you have failed. And the question is, how do you look at the failings? How do you look at your failings? So the failings for sure are not real failings, because Yerida L'Tzorach Aliyah, every failing is only that we have a greater ascent and we go to a greater place thereafter. But do I leave it? Do I take it off the charts afterwards? I've learned from it and I moved on. But do I include it or not include it in my life's journey? In other words, is it something to get beyond your failings or to embrace your failings? So perhaps with this, we have two opinions. 42 is to exclude any of the failings. In other words, life in a perfect straight line is how you need to go. There's no backtracking. There's no retreat. There's only one direction. You come into this world, you're heading towards Sinai to get your marching orders, and you're heading towards the promised land to fulfill what your purpose in life is, to bring the light of Hashem into this world and to change the world for good. And there's no retreat. But then there's another way that you could look. And that's the first way is according to Yehuda of Barcelona. The second path is my retreats, my failings, my difficulties, all of those things, they're part and parcel of the journey. Not that I merely grow from them, but they, how often do I get, just this past week, I get it so often. People lament because once they started learning Torah and come closer to Yiddishkeit, they lament. Why now? Why so late? So the truth is, I don't have an answer. I don't know. The only thing that I do know is it was meant to be this way, obviously, because you weren't faced by this. You weren't engaged by Judaism. You never had that opportunity. And the fact that it came now rather than 10 years earlier or whatever is because there's something that you have to take from those years that you're taking along with you, that you continue with you. I just read the first time I went to the Rebbe was in 1974. And I went with a Chassid, Professor Yitzhak Bloch from London, Ontario. I'm friends with his children, especially one in San Antonio, Texas, Shliach there. And so there was now a write-up about him in the Deher magazine, which is a magazine everybody should subscribe to. And he, by the Fabringens, I remember the first time I came to the Rebbe, he used to hold what was called the Saturday Night Live Midnight Fabringen. And he is someone who wanted to go to yeshiva. He came from Nashville, Tennessee, from a traditional family, but not a religious family. And he became a Chabadnik. This is in the 50s, before the Baal Tshuva movement, And he wanted to learn in yeshiva, and the Rebbe said, no, you need to continue in Harvard. He got his PhD in philosophy, in Aristotelian philosophy, and as a result, many Balei Tshuva are around today from Western University, where he was a professor, London, Ontario, as a result of the fact that he's not a rabbi, but he is a professor at university. So he was Fabringing, and the students said, Professor Bloch, we want to hear your story. We hear that you're a Baal Tshuva, and I like the rest of the people here, in Crown Heights and Chabad. This, I think, was in the early 60s or mid 60s. And he just continued to Fabring. And then he wrote into the Rebbe the whole incident. And the Rebbe told him, the next time you Fabring, share your story. So what was his feeling? His feeling was, I've only got 42 journeys left to go. I'm only going to embrace, the path that's only straightforward. I'm not going to give over something of my past where it was, the retreat, the failings. The Rebbe said, no, share it. So on a simple level, you can say share. Well, it makes you more human. It makes you more relatable. It makes you more, people have a similar story, and therefore maybe you're going to inspire others. That's true. It's something deeper. So how do you look at that retreat or that failing? How do you look at it? So what are we saying here? According to the Rambam, 48 is including the retreat. The journey is including that. So therefore, don't look at it as a failure. Look at it as a part of the steps to your great success and use it for your success. In his instance, to tell the story. In his instance, it was to tell the story. There's a family that used to live in Crown Heights. Now they live in Made Aliyah, Eretz Yisrael. But from the original Balei Tshuva, Miriam Rhodes, and she was, the typical American hippie of the 60s, and spent 4 years in all types of avodah zarah, idolatry, of Eastern religions, experimenting with all the different types and practices until finally she ended up in Crown Heights in 1974, a Pesach Seder, and afterwards she decided to stay and to learn, and she was, very, very moved, and needless to say, ultimately stayed on, got married, and stayed in Crown Heights until she made Aliyah to Israel recently. She wrote a letter to the Rebbe, introducing herself and sharing about the previous 4 years, and described even the pagan practices that she was engaged in, and that she, the idolatry that she performed, experimenting with almost all different kind of pagan Eastern religions. Some people told her that the Rebbe would probably give her a whole set of spiritual remedies to cleanse her soul, from the idolatry, and so on. And the Rebbe wrote to her and says, our sages teach us, Yegaitu Matsasi. If you toil, I will find. Since you have fulfilled the toil that you've searched and searched nonstop, God will help you to reach the Matzah. You'll find the light that your soul needs as a Jew. She was always seeking and seeking. And because you were really seeking, therefore you found. Part of the seeking was going in the wrong places. But if you're really, truly seeking, eventually you'll come to the right place, and you'll do and become what you need to become. And she said with that answer, it just removed from her all of the past that she felt very guilty of, pagan idolatry, and allowed her to move forward and to be able to take the experience and that effort. But the Rebbe saw that her efforts were not just efforts in Yiddishkeit itself, but in everything that she did was an effort to kind of try and find truth, an effort to get closer to God. Yeah, totally off the tracks. Totally, it was pagan, it was idolatry. But it was an effort to seek the truth. And therefore, because it was a real effort, therefore you found the truth. Yagaiti Matzasi. You made the real effort. You made the real find, ultimately. In other words, the effort that she put in the idolatry was part of an effort to try to find truth, to find, God. Yes, not true. It wasn't the truth, and it wasn't God but that's what she wanted. So eventually she got it, because that was the effort. So this is so often that Rebbe would answer people of, everything that you have from your past is only there because it's something that you need to take with you and to mold and shape your future. Now, of course, the paganism of it, you don't take with you, right? That you don't take with you. But the journey of it, you take with you. I mean, paganism, of course, but the effort, the knowledge, the experience that you've gone through, that you take with you, and therefore becomes the 48 journeys of life. So all of us, we all have a story. We all have a story. Some of our stories are more exciting, some are less exciting, but it's not about exciting, not exciting. It's about the fact that we're seeking more. We're seeking to connect to Hashem. We're seeking truth. And we all have our story to tell. And it's a story that should be told. It should be shared. That's one of the things that we do at Chabad Zichron Kadeshim. we try to get people to share. And it's beautiful. Not only is it inspiring and is it empowering for the person who tells their story, but it's, again, part of the journey. It's included. So that's the story, folks. The hair, maybe if you go to the D-E-H, their hair, D-E-R, sorry, D-E-R-H-E-R. Jesus, I don't know. I don't know. I'll have to put up a link somewhere.
D-E-R-H-E-R.
H-E-R, right. I don't know. I'll have to put up a link somewhere.
D-E-R-H-E-R.
H-E-R, right. I don't know. All right. Any questions? Any comments? Gerald, a good vach. Joel, Shavuot Tov. Laurie, good evening. Danny. Danny asked about, the 600,000 was the 20 to 40. There was a 2.5 million Jews that left Egypt. But that was the count for those who served in the army. Elizabeth, Shavuot Tov. Rina, Shavuot Tov. Okay, folks. Any other questions or comments? Yes, I don't know if it's .org, probably .org. You can look there, God willing. A wonderful stuff to read. All right, folks, it's been a pleasure. We'll see you by Tanya tomorrow, God willing.
Beautiful.
Good tavach. Thank you all for joining. Be well.